All right. You want me to roll you one before we start or not?
Sure. Anytime. You don't have to rush. It's okay.
Okay. I mean, you could do it now if you want to take one.
Okay. Let's just start. We'll take care of that later.
All right. Well, all right. So, what's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. If you're listening to this on Spotify, thank you for streaming this. If you're hearing this anytime, anywhere in the universe, we want to thank you for tuning in. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary, here with my beautiful wife,
AKDI from Turkey, and we're going to review Amistad today.
That's right. That's right. The 1997 Spielberg classic, the historical dramatization of some real events that happened in real ass history. And if you like this conversation that we're going to go have right now, check out the previous episodes. This is episode 15. We did a conversation earlier trying to recap this movie, but one of our major supporters, Avery Adams, jumped into the chat, and we had a very dope conversation that lasted about 2 hours or so. You can check that out on my channel on Twitter or X. Just come there and look for the one titled Amistad, but not this one. This one's the for real one. This is the for real review. So, yeah. All right, shall we jump into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so after watching the movie, I could say that I was thrilled. I enjoyed the movie. Overall, I liked it. It didn't have that happy ending, that Spielberg ending where, all the things are just tied up nicely and there's, that family reunification and, the sunsets, the birds sing. It wasn't like how can I say that? It didn't feel, it was a bittersweet ending. I'll say it like that.
It wasn't as Spielbergian as usual.
Yeah, not Spielbergian. I like that word. And I think that's because of the actual events that happen in the story, which makes this different than a movie like Color Purple, another movie that Spielberg made about the Black experience that was fiction. This is real. So he's going to just tell the real story. And at least it somewhat has some good and bad in the ending. But the acting was great. Cinematography was good. I would say this movie is like 12 Years a Slave meets 12 Angry Men. That's how I would describe it. But
yeah, I mean, it is kind of like a court drama. I mean, there's more to it. And I would say that too.
How did you feel about the movie after, it was over?
I mean, it's a powerful story. So the story itself makes it like, fun, or I guess like not fun, but compelling to watch. And I thought overall, like, the movie was good. It's a long movie, but it doesn't feel as long as it is. And there are a lot of like big names, great actors. Acting is great overall. So I enjoyed it. What about you?
Yeah. For a movie that's about 2.5 hours long, it doesn't feel like it. I mean, I would not suggest watching this if you're like tired or sleepy. You got to start watching this at around 7 p.m. Don't watch it at like 12 p.m. when you're like, tired as hell. But the movie opens with some boats on the sea. It's like storming, thundering, raining very heavy. I think the title that they put under it is like 1810 or 1812. So it takes place in the early 19th century. And then it goes inside the boat, and there's a black man, and it looks like his eye is busted up. Like it looks like he'd been hit or punched or something like that, or either that he was like squinting very hard, and he's scraping away at the bolt that keeps him chained up to something, and he's scraping away with this very sharp tool, and he eventually pulls out the nail that has his chains together. He breaks himself out, breaks out the other slaves, and then the first 5 minutes of the movie is like the ending of Django. It's a bunch of white slavers getting killed, getting slaughtered. Like they take over the boat, they're stabbing people, smacking people. The white people are just getting their asses handed to them. One of the captains, the white captain, is like busting his gun. He killed like 1 or 2 slaves, but the main character, Sinke, appears, played by Djimon Hounsou. Did I say that name right?
Yeah, Hounsou.
Yeah, Djimon Hounsou is the main character, the big alpha slave, the big alpha black man. He stands up and goes toe to toe with the captain, starts choking him out with his bare hands, grabs the sword, pierces his ravioli-filled belly, and basically ends it. And he says, "I'm the captain now." This is how Captain Phillips should have went. But what did you think of that opening scene?
Yeah, it was definitely like very action filled. So it keeps you just like sort of glued to the screen from the first moment. And it was like definitely feeling that, victory, a little bit of empowerment, but also like a bit sadness as well. Mm-hmm. So that's how I felt.
Yeah. In slave movies, often you think you're about to watch something where black people are just being subservient, submissive, and dominated over for the next hour and a half to 2 hours. But this movie, from this scene till the very end, the Africans who are kidnapped resist the entire time. And it was good to see that represented on film, because I feel like, a lot of the times the messages are out there that black people went willingly, or how could these men be conquered so easily? But they weren't conquered. They were never conquered. They were just kidnapped. And I think that was good to see.
Yeah, and I just read it just now, but apparently La Amistad means friendship. So that's even a bit more ironic.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
The craziest thing about slavery is that many of the ships had some very interesting names, like the Lion, the Sweet Jesus. Some of the slave ships are documented, and I believe there's a Wikipedia page you can find of every slave ship in the transatlantic. And when you read the names, you're just taken aback. Like, why would you name it Good Love? The slave ship Good Love? What? That's not cool. But so the Africans kill all the captors and white folks on the boat, except for 2. They keep alive this white Spanish man and basically his mulatto, half black, half white servant, who speaks the Africans' language, but also speaks Spanish to translate to them. And so Sinke comes up to him and says, "You will take us home now, like drive us back to Africa or whatever." And the captain, obviously is like scared for his life, but he convinces Sinke to keep him and spare him. Now, when the Africans are speaking in this movie, at first I felt like it wasn't real African language. Like it wasn't any language. It wasn't Igbo, Hausa, Swahili, nothing. I felt like they were just grunting and stuff like that because also there were no subtitles for most of the time the Africans were speaking. Do you feel like they were actually speaking a language?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they're representing like Africans, obviously, at that time. So like they could just pick out a language. I think they were from, where were they from?
They were from the west coast of Africa, and I believe specifically Senegal.
Yeah,
And
okay, yeah, maybe like Senegal or Ivory Coast or something like that.
yeah,
So yeah, I think they might have used like maybe like an older language that was
mhm.
there. I don't know.
Yeah. Actually, if I remember now, they were from Sierra Leone because
Oh
that
yeah,
becomes a big part of the movie later because Sierra Leone was owned by the British. And the British, by this time in history, had outlawed slavery. This is spoilers ahead for everything in the story. But later they find out that they speak Mende, which I believe maybe is a language in Sierra Leone. But Digimon is actually from Benin, right?
yeah.
So Digimon's from Benin, which is like very far away. It's in West Africa, but it's very far away from, uh, Sierra Leone. So I'm thinking maybe okay, Spielberg was like, Digimon, can you just like sound very angry and like cavemanish? I feel like that's what he told him to do. I don't know, man.
Well, I mean, just I was just like looking at it right now, and it is actually a language called Mende, and it's from Sierra Leone, and it's spoken by the Mende people. Like I think it's a bit more of like a tribal language. Like
Hmm.
the way they write it, it looks like Egyptian like scriptures
Hmm.
a little bit, and yeah.
But it would be helpful to know if there are Mende people in Benin, because that would make more sense. Like, okay, Digimon was speaking one of his mother tongues if he
Well,
speaks.
it says Liberia and Guinea,
Okay.
so
Well,
I don't know.
I don't know. I would love to know that, but we don't have time to research that. So let's just move on with the story. Afterwards, the Africans, after they killed all the white folks on the boat, except like the captain and his, tragic mulatto, they're like on the boat and they don't know what to do now. Like, damn, okay, we killed all the people, but how do we look through the what's it called, the binocular, right? Like one of the
Hmm.
Africans picks up the binocular and doesn't know which way to turn it. They're looking at the map and they don't know what they're looking at and stuff like that. And Sinke does not believe that the captain is actually taking him back towards the east, like back to where the sun rises, because that's where they come from. Because he's looking up at the North Star, and the North Star is in the wrong direction. And also, the Muslims on the boat are like praying in the opposite way, which I thought was cool because oftentimes in movies they don't point out that a lot of people who were kidnapped from Africa were Muslim. They say about 20 to 30% of the Africans were Muslims. So it was good to see like the people doing salat on the boat.
Yeah, that was interesting because I too like, whenever you think about like those slavery times, I feel like or at least maybe that's how it was been portrayed in like most of the media, that they were like believing in something else, maybe like something tribal, or they were like, worshiping nature or whatever. But apparently obviously that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And it was nice to see that. But also, like, how do you know like during the day though, like which way to pray?
Well, once again, if you look at the stars, there's one star that's always north, and that's the North Star. So you face the opposite direction, or triangulate your way that's
Yeah, but
opposite of north.
I guess during the day they look at the sun.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, it's easy to
Yeah.
find out which way is east if you glance up at the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Sinke has this cool scene where he like pushes the captain and he tries to control the boat and stuff like
Like
that.
looking up at the star and he's steering the
Yeah.
like the wheel, which was funny. Yeah.
Yeah, it was funny, but it was also cool, like the way it was shot. I like that
Yeah.
scene for real. But I
Yeah.
think I think this whole idea of like the Africans gained back their power and freedom, but they needed knowledge to get truly free, right?
Yeah, I
And
think that's like a general theme also, like, and you can see it from the beginning. Just, they have earned their freedom, they killed their masters and whatnot, and they still are dependent on somewhat like these white men or their capturers because they don't know really of the way of like the Westerners,
hmm.
as in like ship,
Hmm.
in this scene.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and that scene sort of plays out because there's not once a time in the movie where you think, oh, the Africans are dumb or the Africans are like ignorant and stuff like that. You just
Hmm.
get the impression that the Africans, just don't have the knowledge to be able to do what they're doing in the movie.
Yeah,
And
I mean, they
yeah, go ahead.
probably didn't go out into the ocean that far. Like maybe, yeah, they were using like smaller boats to hunt like fish and stuff like that, but they were definitely not, out in big ships in the middle of the ocean.
Right, right, right. There's an interesting scene where the boat is going in the sea, and there's like another boat coming that's like full of white folks who are like on a cruise ship or something because they're like playing music, eating, dancing, like having a good time, rich white people time. And the Africans like tell the captain like, shh, calm down, don't make a noise. And there's that interesting scene where the poor Africans go side by side with this boat full of white folks, and it makes you feel like it's like a sci-fi movie. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
this whole movie with people being captured, brought from one part of the world to another, interacting with a whole different culture that's different than theirs. It feels very science fiction. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. And I think like that ship didn't attack Amistad because they were maybe like a cruise ship since people were like dining on it and stuff.
Hmm.
So maybe like they didn't have enough armed men, so they just didn't attack them. But definitely, it was like sort of like weird to see that sort of like there's that scene. I don't know if you've seen Interstellar. Have you?
I have. I think I tried to watch. That's the one with Brad Pitt, right?
No, that's also Matthew McConaughey.
Matthew McConaughey. Yo, Matthew McConaughey's in this movie, and he's an all star. This movie's full of all stars. Do you have the
Yeah.
cast in front of you?
But yeah, like basically in that movie, I'm gonna spoil it just a little bit, but
Mm.
in that movie, you see like Matthew McConaughey and her daughter like communicating between different like dimensions. and it was kind of like that.
Mm,
If
interesting.
that makes sense. And
I guess so because like they don't communicate on the two boats, but there is that face to face interaction of two different worlds.
yeah, yeah. And like
Interesting.
I guess like those white people in that other boat is like maybe they don't see all the atrocities that their country or like more powerful men are doing
Hmm.
because they were like mostly women and stuff like that. Like they don't see what happens down in the ships. They
Yeah.
don't see like illegal, transporting of slaves and stuff like that.
Right. I mean, that's sort of like similar to how we live today. Like, if we were to go to the places where our sausage is made, where chicken comes from, where
Yeah.
we get our beef, we would be like, oh, this is horrible. Or like where our iPhones come from. Like, if we really knew like the underworld of how everything around us is made, we would probably be aghast, shocked too, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I wonder how that dinner went.
They were like, well, that was something. But yeah, so a scene later, the Africans see land because well, they run out of supplies on the ship. I think about 2 weeks pass. They have no food, no water, and stuff like that. People are getting sick, and the men of the boats make it to shore, and they row out to shore. And the first thing they do is they try to look for water. They find some water, and they try to put it in buckets. They see another black man, and he's riding a bicycle, and he's wearing like Western clothes. But
Was
the
he black?
Africans,
I thought he was like he looked a little like Arab.
no, no. Okay, this was this was
Okay.
early America acting. I'm sorry, but your representation. There's no representation for your people here. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. Sorry.
No,
I just remember making that joke because of how like he looked. I said like, did they end up in Tunisia or something? Like, did they end
oh,
up going back but just the wrong coast?
yeah, I do remember you saying that when we were watching the movie, but I was like, why did you say that?
Okay,
But
maybe I saw it wrong.
no, they saw a fat black man on a bicycle dressed like George Washington, and and they try to yell at him in African language, Mende, whatever, but he like runs away on his bike, which is interesting because throughout the movie there's this dichotomy between the Africans and the the slaves, the black people in America who are more westernized. Maybe they were born there and stuff like that. And there's always this like underlying tension. I feel like throughout the movie, there's some understanding, but then there's also some tension, especially like when Morgan Freeman character comes in later. But that's just something I felt while watching the movie. But I don't know if you felt it. Did you?
Yeah, I felt it too because like, I guess we'll get to the later scenes and stuff. They sometimes think like the black men in America who are free and who are dressed kind of like white men, they feel like, they've been turned into the white men or something like that.
Mm.
So yeah, there's that like even there's that doubt when they're faced with a black African. I'm sorry, black African American. Too much,
Mm. Too many
too many
distinctions.
words. Yeah, when they're faced with like African Americans, they still have that doubt. I
Yeah.
would say.
There's like two things. They expect them to help them. Like the
Yeah,
Africans, they come up to him and they say, "Chief or brother, help us." But then the other times they're like, "Oh, you are the white man" or something like that.
yeah,
It was interesting. But either way, the Africans get the water. They're rowing up to the back to the boat. But while on the ship, the Amistad, there's a U.S. Navy ship that rolls by, and the Navy ship is at first rolling by. They're like, keep going, keep going. But then the two white guys on the boat who are kidnapped, they say, help us, ayuda, ayuda, like in Spanish or whatever. And so then the U.S. Marshals or the U.S. Navy seamen, whatever, like come down in the boats and they start rowing after the Africans who are trying to row back to the Amistad to get water to their people. And basically, some of them jump over, they try to swim, they try to escape, but they're all captured by the U.S. Navy seaman guy. They're brought back to the land, back in chains and stuff like that. They're put in prison, and yeah, now they're trapped in this new world. They like force them in jail too. Like once again, during this whole time, even though the Africans didn't have food, water, nothing, they're still like resisting the entire time. They're like, let us go, da
yeah.
da da. Yeah,
Yeah, like they're resisting like a lot because like Digimon's character, he stands up in front of the door and they literally like close the metal door of the prison gate like on his hand, and it is like a very painful scene to watch.
yeah,
And yeah, they're like shouting and chanting, they're like in their own languages. It was cool.
yeah.
Like those were cool scenes.
It was very cool. And once again, when they land, and they land somewhere in Massachusetts, I believe. They land in Massachusetts, and once again, there's this alien world that they enter into because the Africans come out and they're like wearing their garb, like, not much clothes, and they're surrounded by all these people dressed like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington everywhere. And it still feels so alien and weird. Like,
Yeah, like every time they make them walk out in the streets, like in public, when they're like taking them from one place to another, like they're afraid, obviously, and they're sad and there's desperation there, but then they're also like a little bit curious about like what the hell is happening here.
yeah, yeah, it's totally like the world is upside down and stuff like that. But now that we're in America, this part of the story, we have to talk about the all-star cast because this movie is packed with like some crazy appearances. Like everybody shows up in this movie. Can you tell us the cast of like who's here?
Yeah, I mean, we said Digimon is here as Sinke,
He's
and
the
then
guy
we
from
have,
Blood Diamond, by the way. For anybody listening, if you've seen Blood Diamond, he's him. I think he was also married to Kimora Lee Simmons. Man's an all-star, all-star.
I don't know who he's married to, but yeah. Anyway, so we have Anthony Hopkins as John Quincy Adams.
You mean Hannibal Lecter?
Okay, yeah, there were a lot of jokes about this, but then we have Morgan Freeman as Theodore Jackson.
Kind of a useless
Jodson,
character.
sorry.
Low key, low key.
Huh.
Morgan did his thing, but his character was kind of useless.
Yeah, yeah. I was expecting like a bit more than him, but I think they also made a little bit like of a point in that because it was like even though I might be free and I might not like I'm not a slave in this country anymore, but I still have like kind of like my hands tied when it comes to bureaucracy or law.
Mm.
So maybe that's why they kept his character like kind of low key. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. But go ahead.
Like
Who else is in this movie?
Digimon's translator had more lines than Morgan Freeman.
Yeah, and I don't know who that brother is, but he did his
Yeah.
thing too in the movie. Do you know who that was?
Yeah, we'll get to him. So yeah, Matthew McConaughey as Roger Sherman Baldwin,
Mm.
and then I think this is the translator. I'm not sure. Chiwetel Ejiofor. I'm sorry if I'm butchering this name.
I feel like I've heard. I feel like
Chiwetel.
what's his name?
His Chiwetel, like
Chiwetel.
yes,
Oh,
Chiwetel.
Chiwetel.
He
I
was
feel like
also
I've.
in 12 Years a Slave.
Yeah, I think he's the main character in 12 Years a Slave.
Uh,
I believe so.
yes, he's Solomon.
Yeah, he's Solomon. Okay. So he's been doing slave.
Wow.
That's crazy. So
Yeah, he's
yeah,
playing the translator, I think.
yeah. So this movie is packed with all stars, straight up, and everybody's performance is good. But I feel like Anthony Hopkins definitely deserved an Oscar for this because his
Yeah.
performance was dope. He held it down every scene. He really brought John Quincy Adams, the character, to life. And he delivers a powerful monologue at the end too, which was definitely Oscar worthy. Get that man a trophy. When I was watching the movie, I said, "Acty, pick up the phone. I got to call the Academy. They made a mistake."
You're
But
silly. But yeah, I mean, I was a bit annoyed with his character at first because he was talking all in like sayings
yeah, he was talking
and
in
metaphors.
Constitution.
Yeah, he was talking Constitution, and it was kind of like hard for me to understand what the hell he was talking about. And I didn't know if it was because like I'm Turkish and I just like don't understand Constitution.
Right. Avery Adams started laughing. I'll make this. He was talking congressional. He was talking congressional. But
But yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
pick up with the story. Pick up where we left off. So the Africans are in jail, and what happens next?
Yeah, and they are basically like they take them to court because they're supposed to be like there have to be some resolution to their existence in America, and so they're in court. And I think before the court, we do meet like the two abolitionists who are played by Morgan Freeman, and the other guy is I think
Doesn't matter.
Hollowberg
What's his
or
name?
Tappan.
Yeah, Tappan. There's two abolitionists in the North, and they own a newspaper called the Emancipator, and they find out about the Africans that just arrived on the boat out of nowhere, and so they're trying to fight for their freedom because they believe it's God's right or God's commandment to free every man, right?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, they're in court, and like there are two sides. One side is like the U.S. Army side, who's saying like we found the slaves like in the in the ship, and we took them here. And then the Spanish are also fighting for it, and they're saying like they were our property and stuff like that. And both sides are claiming that they were like born in like they were from Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they're born in America in a plantation, they're still considered as property.
Right.
But if they were born in Africa, they're considered free men because
Right.
slavery is now banished.
Right. And let's talk about the Spain part real quick because for some reason, well, at first you don't know what's happening, but they jump to Spain and they show this little girl at the table, like eating fancy food and wearing like fancy clothes. And then they show at the bottom of the screen, Queen Elizabeth II of Spain, right? And so basically the Queen of Spain is like this 14-year-old girl at the time. And there's this big conflict between Spain and the U.S. Because of this, the issue of the slaves. Queen Elizabeth thinks that the slaves belong to her because they were on a Spanish boat being transported from Cuba, a Spanish colony. And the Americans are like, what do we do in this situation? Were they really from Cuba? Stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think like the Queen Isabella
Pardon.
part was like just to show that how ridiculous the like some of the empires were because they were like run by little girls. Like obviously the little girl doesn't make every choice. I'm sure like she has different like people just deciding for her and whatnot.
Yeah, she had that fat man with her all the time who was telling her what to write, what to say, and giving her directions.
Yeah, and obviously I think it was just there to show like how decisions were made, which was ridiculous.
Right.
Like
Absolutely.
it involved people that didn't even like closely related to these people's lives in the ship.
Right. So yeah, the Africans are in court. Everybody comes out of the woodwork trying to claim them, and that was a very interesting scene because it was like the Africans couldn't speak up for themselves, but everybody was trying to claim their ownership or their property over them, right?
Yeah,
and then, so go ahead.
Yeah, and I just want to say like they're standing in the court, they're looking at like whoever is speaking, they're trying to understand what's happening. And it was like kind of funny. Like one of the African guys had like a headpiece made from the U.S. flag because like he just wanted to be protected from the sun on the ship, I guess, or something like that. And he put that, and it was just like kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then this guy Tappan and Morgan Freeman's character come in, and they say like, no, these men were born free, and they weren't from Cuba. We need them to like be set free and be returned back to Africa to their home.
Right. So the court sort of adjourns. It finishes that day with no clear decision on where the Africans can go. And then, what's his name? Matthew McConaughey's character.
Baldwin.
Yeah, Baldwin, the lawyer, played by Matthew McConaughey, approaches Morgan Freeman and the fat white man that won't leave Morgan Freeman alone. Because anyway, he approaches the two abolitionists and says, this is a property dispute. It's not an issue about whether slavery is good or not. And at first, they didn't like that idea because they're trying to advocate that everybody's free. We're all human and stuff like that. But, Baldwin is like, well, you can argue that, but it's about the law. It's about what can we actually win, not about ideals. And I thought that was interesting because that's an interesting dispute. When you're arguing for something, do you try to win based on just the ideas, the big ideas, or do you actually try to just win by any means necessary? I don't know. What do you think about that?
I mean, at this point, like in the history or in their condition, I do believe that just playing fair and square was not really going to get them that second chance that they had in like the big court. So I do think that was like a smart move. But there was also like some selfishness in Baldwin. You know, I kind of felt like he was trying to create an image for himself in the upcoming years of America, because he was obviously like a smart guy. He was a practical guy. And I think he kind of saw like what America was going to go through with Civil War and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So maybe he was trying to like, you know, get himself a little bit of that righteous, powerful position.
Yeah.
And yeah, like obviously he was in the right path and he was like doing it for good reasons and stuff like that, but he just had to play smart at that time.
Right, right. I think also he was just a young lawyer just trying to make a name, make some money, you know, so why not attach yourself to the biggest case in U.S. history? So after that exchange, the scene then shoots to the president of the U.S. at the time, who was Martin Van Buren, and he's running for re-election. He's trying to get his job again for another 4 years. And his advisors are telling him, you know, the case of the 40 or 50 Africans on the Amistad is a big deal. You should probably do something about it. And Martin Van Buren is like, I don't care about any of that. I don't care. Like, let them niggas go. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. He just wants to be like reelected and, you know, stay as president and whatever. So he's like, do whatever you do, but just like keep me the president.
Yeah, yeah. And there is this big contention in the U.S. Like, there's a lot of tension because, you know, the southern states are very anxious about slavery. You know, the British just abolished slavery, and he's worried that maybe the U.S. might do it too. So there's that. And Martin Van Buren is like, I just don't want a civil war. I just want to get reelected. So, you know, take care of it, right? So after that, I believe Baldwin joins the case with the two abolitionists to try to represent the two Africans. And he's going there trying to talk to the Africans, but the Africans don't know any English,
Yeah.
which was really, really hard. And you know, they start talking to them in English, which is so American.
They know they have like this linguist with them, and
Yeah.
this guy actually doesn't know Mende language, but I think he was there to like discover how it is, discover some words, and then like maybe make some assumptions of how the language is.
Right. All right. Let's talk about this though. So Baldwin shows up to the jail where the Africans are with the two abolitionists, and he shows up with a linguist too. And they come with the table, because anywhere white people go in this movie, they always bring a table with them.
Yeah, that was so ridiculous. Like, do you really need to put your map on the table?
I don't know, but anyway, they come in with the table into the jail, and the Africans actually have tribes within the jail. So they put down the table and they say, you can't put that here. This is like Mende land, and you will take this to Shango land or something like that. So they're moving the table all throughout the jail, and the white folks don't know what happened. They don't know what's going on. But I thought that was very, very interesting that there was tribalism even while they were, you know, held in bondage. And it clicked in my mind. I didn't say this while we were watching it. I was like, oh, they don't know they're black. They don't know they're black yet. They're still thinking like Africa. This is something else, buddy. I don't know. What did you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting like point, because I didn't think of that. Yeah, they don't know what makes them like, what puts them in this particular like position in jail, and they're like, what did we do? Like, what is happening? And yeah, that was very interesting. But I mean, I'm guessing maybe they knew somehow, because obviously where they were from, like in Sierra Leone, I would assume like there were like some rumors or stories of people getting kidnapped and stuff like that. So maybe they knew a little bit, but they didn't know like it was because they were black or something.
Right, right. Because this is a spoiler for later, but the Africans even talk about later that there is slavery back in Africa, right? But you know, their slavery is totally different than what is happening in America. Where
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that. But I really thought that tribal scene was interesting. And also, I think there's a character here that is not explored enough. So Sinke, played by Djimon, is like the lead African, right? He's the leader of the whole crew. But there's actually like a second guy too, who I believe is like from another tribe. And when Baldwin and the abolitionists show up with a linguist in the jail to try to talk to the Africans, he's actually like the first guy that they talk to. And he's a big, tall guy, big, strong guy, big voice and stuff like that. And they try to talk to him, but he doesn't want to hear it. And he says, you are idiots, and walks away to these people, right? And then throughout the rest of the movie, we really don't hear from him, but he's sort of always in the background, and he sort of always looks mad and somewhat jealous at Sinke, in my opinion. Like, in
Are you
the
talking about
background.
the Bible guy?
Was that the Bible guy? Is that him?
I don't know, like, because the Bible guy kind of took those like white people's clothes in the ship and was walking around like a shaman from Britain. So I don't know, like he was like a spiritual guy back in the tribe or something like that. So I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about, but I didn't really saw another like.
Okay. Maybe I got them confused, but that's a good point. That's actually a very good point. Maybe he like, you know, took all the white man's clothes and was also picking up like the Bible and stuff like that. I don't know, man. I felt like he was an interesting character. I just wish there was more about him, because I just really remember that scene when he walked away and said, "You are idiots," and I feel like I didn't hear from him after that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think also in the beginning of the movie we see him and Djimon kind of like disagreeing on something, but we don't understand what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, they have a fight. Yeah, they do have a fight at the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like arguing over like who's gonna kill who or something. I don't know.
Yeah, but anyway, pick it up with the story after this.
Yeah, so they go in there and they basically try to ask like, where are you from? Because we really need that information. Like, we really truly believe that you are not from Cuba. So, and they try to like show the map and whatever, but they don't understand. They're like, I don't know, maybe they're thinking like it's not that far or something. Like they don't have just the concept of like continents and stuff like that, or they're not really sure like where their country is in the map, on the map, or whatever, or maybe just they don't understand. So we really see like that struggle with language, and the translator is like basically saying like, oh yeah, they just said they have to leave, and he's just like making up stuff. But it like yeah, and they don't trust like the lawyer in the beginning. They're like angry with them and stuff like that. So they basically like can't do anything right now.
Right, right. I think somehow after this scene, we're introduced to Anthony Hopkins' character, John Quincy Adams.
Oh yeah, yeah. They go and
Yeah, I forgot exactly what was the transition or what was the purpose, but basically, John Quincy Adams, I believe, was like the third, fourth, or fifth president of the U.S., and his father was President Quincy Adams. But after his term as president, John Quincy Adams just sort of becomes like a low-level, like state representative and stuff like that. He's an old man, very famous lawyer, and of course he was a president. But now he just like sleeps at the office. He like doesn't really do much work. He just talks Constitution all day and talks in like old grandpa parables.
yeah, and
And so
gardens.
yeah, yeah. So the abolitionist Morgan Freeman and his homie go up to the state house and try to convince John Quincy Adams to like come on their side to help represent the Africans, because Quincy Adams sort of has been like not against slavery but not for slavery either. But people kind of get the feeling like he's against slavery. What did
Yeah,
you think
yeah.
of like when we first meet him?
I mean, like I said, I kind of like, was annoyed by his character because obviously the first reason was like he didn't really wanted to help because it felt like he was playing like the middle ground, He was like, I don't want to help you, but I also like do understand that you're doing the right thing, so just do it without me. So yeah, I felt like he was a bit cowardish, and also like I didn't understand like 90% of the stuff he said. But yeah, he just felt like, one of those like old weird dudes.
Right, right, right.
I mean,
Yeah.
what about
So
you? Do you know a lot about like the actual president and stuff
no,
like
not
that?
at all.
Okay.
No,
Okay. I guess like he was like too early,
no.
not
Like
that significant.
look, the way it works in most Americans' minds is like this. Okay, George Washington was first. Then after that was Thomas Jefferson. Then a bunch of other guys, and then like Abraham Lincoln, and then a bunch of other guys, and then maybe like Teddy Roosevelt. Some other guys, JFK. Some other guys, Reagan. Oh wow, Black President Obama, and now we're here. That's the way it works in like I think 90% of Americans' minds. I
That's
don't think
funny.
anybody can list all the presidents. Or
I
like,
mean, yeah.
if you say like who is number 12, I'm gonna be like Tupac. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, I'm the same with like Turkish presidents. Like there are a couple of that really caused a havoc. And then, there are just some people that were kind of like ghosts.
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, I think the first day of the trial begins with the Africans.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, the prosecution is trying to argue that they actually belong to the two Spanish guys who were on the boat. They say, oh, the Africans belong to them. Here is the sale of receipts where they bought them in Cuba and they're transporting them to the US. And Baldwin is trying to argue that these men are not from Cuba because they don't know any Spanish. He walks up to them and says, hola. And they're like, huh? He says, levante ter, or something like that, like stand up. And they're like, huh? And he has to pull out a chair and sit and stand up in it. And then they say, ah, and then they all stand up. And I thought that was actually a pretty good argument in court.
Yeah, yeah. It was like very practical, very solid, like just right here in front of your eyes. They don't know Spanish. They don't know English. They are from somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. And the judge is not buying it because the judge is like, well, they have a receipt that says they bought them. Do you have any evidence? And he said, yeah, I could have evidence if I wrote something down that says they're not from Africa too. And he said,
Yeah,
that's
the
not
judge is
enough.
like, yeah,
Yeah, he
exactly.
said, that's not enough. And then he said to the judge, what more evidence do I need? I have them. And then the camera shoots to them. And this sort of reminds me of like what Avery was talking about earlier. Like we know when somebody's African. Like just looking at just looking at them, you could tell they were African. You get what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah.
Like they had certain teeth, certain marks on their face. I think even Morgan Freeman mentioned in the movie that they have certain marks and stuff like that that
Yeah.
somebody born in the Americas would not have.
Yeah, I think you can also see it like if you remember there was like the old guy in the
Mhm,
tribe that was like that died,
mhm.
and he had like marks on the side of his face,
Right, right. So they
like
had like
like tattoos.
yeah, like tattoos or engravings or scars, which is somewhat typical in like some African tribes and stuff like that. They
Yeah.
do that. So yeah, what
Should
happens
I
after that?
continue?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So after that, they're basically like all of the lawyers are like, okay, we have to like gear it up and we have to like really find evidence and all of that. So Morgan Freeman and Tappan goes to the ship that like the Amistad, and they're like trying to find some evidence and stuff like that. And it was funny, like you said, Morgan Freeman goes down to like the down department of the ship where the slaves were kept,
Hmm.
and he sees like all the chains and stuff, and he's like kind of having a little bit of like anxiety attack, like he's feeling very disturbed by all of it. And he finds like good evidence. He finds like this sort of tooth thing that I guess Sinke was using to break free, maybe, I don't know,
Yeah.
or he dropped it or something, but it belonged to him. And then he also finds that notebook the captain hid when they were like taken over by the Africans.
Yeah,
So he finds evidence, but during that scene, like he tackles and he falls like under the chains and he's like kind of panicking and stuff, which was like, a little bit funny because you made a joke at the time, but it was also like,
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
interesting.
Yo, if anybody ever like hangs out with me and like watches a slave movie with me, don't think I'm gonna be like mad or upset. I'm making jokes the entire time because there's only so much trauma you can look at before you have to laugh at it. And like
Yeah.
when Morgan Freeman went into the slave ship, I was like, oh, the ancestors got in his ass. They would
But
be
yeah,
like,
I think I said like, you got to do better, Morgan.
you got to do Morgan. Like, you got to do better, Morgan. Definitely, the ancestors are like haunting his ass. And I was listening to somebody. I forgot exactly who, but they were talking about how. I think it was some slave movie that they were making with Samuel L. Jackson. I don't know if it was Django or not, but when they took him to the plantation, like he had an anxiety attack. Like
Yeah.
when Black Americans like go to those places that are really, really tied to that history, you can feel that energy there. And I feel like even if that wasn't a real slave ship, just recreating that environment might have been, traumatic for like an old man like Morgan Freeman. You know what I mean?
Of
So
course. I mean, there's generational trauma that comes from even knowing that you were part of this sort of history and specifically like on the oppressed side.
mhm.
So there's that trauma. And then when you see those places, plantations or slave ships or whatever, obviously it's going to bring up like those type of feelings and it's just like, I guess, kind of remembering what your ancestors went through. And yeah, I can't even like imagine that type of feeling.
Yeah, I got a
Have you
friend.
ever experienced anything like that? Like, I don't know, we were in Fort Jesus or something. I
No,
don't know.
no, in Fort Jesus, not exactly, because I didn't know exactly that place, what it was. But I did feel that when we were in Mauritius and we went to that maroon colony, like I felt that
Hmm.
energy in the air, like at that place. That was one of the places I felt that, I don't know, just that vibration. Especially when we went to the huts where these people who escaped slavery in Mauritius used to live. That's where I definitely
Yeah.
felt that.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, that was like a strong scene. I do
Yeah.
feel like because I do feel like Morgan Freeman's character was kind of feeling guilty
Mm,
because we see the scene when Morgan Freeman is like riding a chariot
hmm.
and the African slaves are just like passing by from him and then they say like, "Hey, brother, chief," and then he just like keeps on walking and they're talking amongst themselves like he's one of them and stuff like that.
Right,
So
right,
I do think he feels like a little bit of guilt for not being able to
right.
help them.
I don't think that was Morgan Freeman's character, though. I think that was another black actor, like just
Oh,
somebody who
okay.
wasn't in the story. But either way, I do think he does feel guilt, though, because of that thing exactly. Like, he's like, these people have such a unique situation, but I can't really help them because I'm a part of this new world, too.
Yeah.
So anyway, they go back to court with the new evidence. Baldwin presents the captain's log that says, "Oh, they didn't really come from Cuba. This ship has been out on sea much longer than if they took a trip from Cuba." So this, puts their whole thing out of order. Plus, it's like a Portuguese. There's some Portuguese in the document too that shows that once again they are not actually from Cuba. They must have been bought somewhere else. So
Mhm.
yeah, the defense's case falls apart, and Martin Van Buren hears about this and he says, "Oh, you know what we need to do? We actually need to get another judge." So there's like corruption happening. So the judge was about to rule in Baldwin's favor, but they got another judge, a Catholic judge who's young, and he's going to come in there and rule on the side of the prosecution, trying to say that these slaves belong in America or belong to Spain rather than
Mhm.
free.
Mhm.
And that was crazy that much corruption was actually happening.
Yeah, I was
But
like, is it Turkey? What is happening here? I thought this was like illegal in the States,
no, I mean, I guess it
but
could happen anywhere. That would you say that could definitely happen in Turkey, like replace the judge
that
and all?
happens in Turkey like every day, probably.
Wow, wow, wow.
But yeah, I mean, I wasn't too shocked because I'm used to this stuff. But
Mm,
yeah, it was definitely like a moment where you're saying like, oh, God damn it, like they're not going to be able to win because now it's like not a fair play, not a
right,
fair game.
right, right.
So yeah.
And once again, Martin Van Buren, the president, is not like motivated by hate or he's not explicitly like racist. He's just like,
Mhm.
I just want to be president and not have to worry about these problems no
Yeah,
more.
he doesn't
And
want like the South states attacking him and not
mhm,
electing him and stuff like that. So he's
right,
basically like trying to postpone the Civil War.
right, right. And he
But
picks this judge who is Catholic, by the way. And being Catholic at that time in the U.S. was like a big deal, because America's mostly Protestant. But Catholics are seen sort of like how Jews or something like that, like
mm,
others. We don't really like them. So
okay,
he was
I
like,
didn't know that.
yeah, yeah. So the new young judge comes and
Uh,
here's all the evidence and stuff like that.
should I
Uh,
continue?
yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so I think before they go to another trial, Morgan Freeman's character go to see John Quincy Adams one
Right.
more time, and he's like telling him like, "Can you do something about this because they changed the lawyer? Like, what are we supposed to do? Can you help us now?" And things like that. And like he's just Quincy John Adams is just like mending his plants and stuff like that. He's not really taking him seriously, but he's also curious about it, and he asks like, "What is their question? I'm sorry, what is their story?" And Morgan Freeman's character says like they're from West Africa. I don't
Mm,
know, like they don't know their story because they can't talk.
mm,
So yeah, and then John Quincy Adams says like then learn their story. Like where are you from? He says I'm from Georgia.
mm.
And but what is your story? And then the ex-president says like, you're an ex-slave who dedicated his life to be an abolitionist. I can't say this word.
Abolitionist.
Anti-slavery.
Yeah,
I'll say this.
okay.
Who dedicated his life to be an anti-slavery like leader, and you're running a newspaper, whatever. This is your story. Your story is not that you're from Georgia. So what is their story?
I want to say something. I didn't like that scene because I feel like it was like, this white guy labeling him and telling him his story. I know John Quincy Adams is supposed to be the wise old grandfather in this movie who knows everything, but he's waiting at the right time to act. But I really didn't like that. I wish Morgan or, his character actually got to actually say his story. Because what if he said all that and he was like, no, bro, I just came up from Georgia. I got a job. It wasn't a big struggle. You know what I mean? It didn't have to be like that. But I don't know. I wasn't feeling that.
I do think it would have been better if he said it himself, but I think the point there was that actually like John Quincy Adams was giving him a hint of what to do. Mm-hmm. So it was like legal advice more than like just labeling him. But I do think like Morgan Freeman overall deserved more lines in this movie. Mm-hmm. Right. But yeah, anyway, so then after that, Morgan and Matthew McConaughey, I'm not using their real names.
No, let me ask
Theodore
you something though. Can I ask you something though?
Yeah.
About that scene where Morgan Freeman's character says, I'm from Georgia, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like some people might watch that movie and say, see, that's the problem with African Americans. They don't know where they come from, really. You are black, brother. You are from Africa. You should know where you come from. You should know your roots. Like, what do you think? Like, do you feel like, if I say I'm from Louisiana or another person says I'm from Georgia, you're like, is that wrong? Should we be claiming an African country or claiming Africa instead of America or the states we come from? I don't know. What's your opinion on all this?
I will answer your question, but I just have to admit something.
What?
When I saw that scene in the movie and he asked where you're from, and then Morgan said Georgia, I thought he was going to ask, no, where are you really from?
Oh, that's hilarious. That's hilarious.
But
that's
anyway,
hilarious if you've traveled. If you've traveled, that's hilarious.
Anyway, about like your question, I feel like you, wherever you identify with is where you're from. I don't think you need to know like, the root, what was your DNA traced to and whatever. I don't think like that's supposed to be like a mandatory thing to know. Like if you feel like you're from Louisiana at heart, then you're from there. Like I was born in Istanbul, but I grew up in a small town called Marmaris. And when people usually ask, like if it's a Turkish person, I say like I'm from Marmaris because that's where I feel like I'm from because I grew up there. I mean, when foreign people ask, I just say Istanbul because I don't have time to explain Marmaris. But
all right, let me ask you something though. Let's say you meet a Turkish person in Germany or in Hungary, right? Mm-hmm. And let's say they only speak Hungarian or Turkish or something like that. I'm not Hungarian, not Turkish, but I mean Hungarian or German, but not Turkish, right? And you ask them where they're from because they still have a Turkish name. They have a very Turkish name, the Turkishest of Turkish names. And you ask them where they're from, and they say I'm from Budapest or I'm from Denmark, whatever. Wouldn't you then ask them, no, where are you really from? And then they keep on claiming that. Wouldn't that make you feel like upset that they aren't claiming Turkey? Or don't you think most Turkish people would be upset because they're not claiming Turkey?
I mean, I would say most Turkish people will be upset. I'm not that nationalistic. I will admit that I'm probably going to ask that person, are you from Turkey? Like, or I'm going to ask, like, are you originally from Turkey? Because, like, your name is Turkish. But, yeah, like, I wouldn't feel bad if they didn't claim that because most of the time those people, like, are actually born in Germany or Budapest or wherever. So that's where they grew up. Like, it's very natural to claim that this is where you're from, So, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I do think it's interesting to find out like your roots and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have that video where my family tree goes back to like Virginia to like 1780 something. And that's as far back as I know. And maybe somebody in my family knows even more. But I feel like, for, like you said, where you're from is where you're from. You can claim wherever you are in this world because we're all human and stuff like that, in my opinion. Yeah. But the thing with us, like we're such a unique people. We've been in America for such a long time. And our roots and our blood goes into the soil of that nation. So I don't find anything wrong with a black person saying, I'm from Georgia or I'm from Virginia. You can claim that if, great, 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 great granddaddy, was from there too,
Definitely.
Like, and we can't claim Africa because like the countries and places that we came from don't exist anymore. Like 400, 500 years ago, there was no Nigeria, Cameroon, Senegal. These were like totally different kingdoms, colonies that have now been switched up and remixed and all sorts of things. So
yeah. I mean, like, in my government page, my like great, 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 great grandfather is from Georgia or something like that. Like Georgia, the country, not the state. So yeah, I don't think of myself as Georgian because that's like too far away from me at this point. Like I do acknowledge that there probably is like that DNA in me, but that doesn't really like resonate with who I am today.
No. All right. I just wanted to talk about that, but
no, it's an interesting topic. Yeah.
All right. You want to continue with the story or should I?
Yeah, I can continue.
Good,
yeah, so after that conversation, Theodore and Baldwin go out to the docks where there are like, people and workers and a lot of black people and stuff. And they start like, so the first translator they got discovered like the numbers. So they know how to say 1, 2, 3 in Mende. So they basically go out to like just random people trying to speak in Mende and trying to find if somebody else was, from where they're from Sierra Leone. and they find like this young black man who was, probably like his family was captured or something like that. And yeah, he knows Mende and he knows English. So they take him as a translator to talk to Sinke.
You know what's the crazy thing? You know what? This movie is a part of the 12 Years a Slave universe because Solomon might have known Mende.
Mm. I mean, I saw it in the Wikipedia page of Mende that they also use this language in Blood Diamond too.
Okay. Okay. By the way, the guy who is the translator also played that guy in the movie about where people had babies in the eggs. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah, that's where I remember him from, I think.
Yeah. Oh, I wish we reviewed that movie. That was an interesting one. But
Yeah.
anyway, go ahead with the story.
Anyway, yeah, so yeah, they take the translator to Sinke, and now they can actually understand each other. And Baldwin is trying to convince Sinke to tell his story. Like he's like, you need to tell me your story, and we need to tell it in court. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to like win. And then there's like this whole part of Sinke actually like telling them what he went through in the boat and all the like atrocities, how they were taken. Like there was like a woman who died. They had to like take her baby.
Wait, before that though, there was
What?
an interesting conversation where
Oh, about the lion?
yeah, about the lion. So Senke is a reluctant leader, and I feel like Senke is like the typical, how can I say, person who is going on a hero's journey. The story of this movie is a man who went on a hero's journey, reluctantly becoming a hero. And Senke was chosen by the other Africans because back in Africa, he killed a lion with his bare hands. Right, that's the rumor that's around town. So they all look up to him and fear him in a way. But Senke actually tells the story to them when the translator comes. They look up to me because I killed a lion, but they don't know the story. I was going outside taking a piss when a lion pops out, and I got so scared I picked up a rock and oh my god, I hit the lion on the head. It was a total accident, but I came back and told all my niggas I did it on purpose. and now they think I'm a gangster. So they gave me a bunch of clothes, a bunch of women, a bunch of gold, but I
Wow.
took it anyway, even though I felt like I didn't deserve it.
Okay.
And yeah, I dramatized the story, but that's essentially what happened. Like he feels like a hero who didn't deserve it, right? Like some sort of like imposter. But then Baldwin tells him, "But you are a hero. Remember, Sinke, you were the one who broke free. You were the one who killed the captain on the boat. You were the one who tried to lead people to freedom. You do have a hero in you," and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And while Sinke is telling this story, he's saying all of this essentially in Morgan Freeman's face. So he's saying like, I felt that's one of the big tension scenes right there, because when Sinke is talking about, I resisted white supremacy, I resisted oppression the entire time, and I've proven myself to be a man. He's sort of like he's saying this while Morgan Freeman is like wearing like these Western clothes and this stupid Abraham Lincoln top hat, and sort of like a defeated man being talked down to from a superior man. That's what it felt like. I don't know. What
Yeah.
did you think of that?
Yeah, I think again there was like that guilt, and also like Sinke not really understanding why this like maybe why this man who why this black man is like with these white people, because obviously these white people are like doing something terrible to us. And maybe he's like, Sinke's like, how can he like just stand there and not really like, try to do anything as much as this white lawyer is trying to do? Maybe that was the case. Like, I don't think like Morgan Freeman's character and Sinke ever had a conversation through the translator even.
Right.
Like,
But I think
yeah.
that might have been what Sinke was thinking. But Sinke didn't know that Morgan Freeman was a part of an entire movement to try to free all the black people in America.
Yeah.
So like there's still that disconnect because Sinke doesn't know about the outside world and what type of system he's in. Because honestly, Morgan Freeman's character is like the Sinke to the rest of the country, right? Like he's a part of a big movement. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. And I think like yeah, there was that difference between their understanding of the world. And I'm sure like in the real story, Theodore Jotson, Morgan Freeman's character, he had to like sometimes, overlook certain things white people say, or had to like just, put on his white voice and whatever, and, just act like a likable black person and whatnot, just to like be able to continue his revolution. Sort of from the shadows maybe. And we see like him actually trying going talking to the ex-president and stuff like that. So he's really working behind the scenes. He's the one who found the evidence of the things. So yeah, I think he feels sort of sad maybe not being able to connect to Sinke because of that, but also because Sinke represents how they were in Africa. Not busy with fighting the white supremacists because they're in Africa, like everyone is African, everyone is black, everyone is happy living with their families. So he represents something that Morgan Freeman probably will never like taste or didn't ever know because of the situation he was in.
Yeah, exactly. It's like meeting your cousin from a totally different side of the world, and you just have that disconnect.
Yeah,
But,
like your cousin is a billionaire, and like and now he's poor, but you don't even know what being a billionaire is like.
Exactly. That's a very good point. That's deep. That's deep.
Yeah,
That's deep.
and I don't know, maybe like, and now you're like a middle class person, and he was a billionaire before, but now you think maybe you're a little bit better than him.
Even deeper. Go, Acty,
But
go.
it's a bit of like a complex also, because he tasted something that you will never taste,
Okay, you building
like
right now. Acty chopping it
that
up.
type of
Let's go.
freedom. I mean, I know Avery is like listening, and he said like, what is the difference between Africans and Black Americans? So maybe this is like, one of the different viewpoints.
I mean, it is deep because, like, once again, like the Africans have like their way of doing things, and
Hmm.
because of the creation of the African American, what we went through and stuff like that, we do have a way for us to enjoy life, a way for us to live, a way for us to connect and have family moments, just like how they had in Africa too.
Of
Because like
course.
when Sinke is telling his story about what his life was like in Africa, they show him and his kids, him and his family having a great life. But we have those same things in America too. But the America that we see in the movie of Amistad is just one part of the grim story. But within that,
Hmm.
there's still Black life that's celebrated and joyous and stuff. But
Of course, of
yeah.
course. There's like that joy, that family, that tradition in African Americans as well. But then there's also like this constant fight. And one thing that I guess like the Africans don't have to deal with unless they leave their country or the continent or whatever, they really don't have to deal with that fight. I mean,
Well,
obviously they fight different fights. It's different everywhere around the world, but not just the same one.
right. I mean, they're not fighting a fight against the white supremacists, but they have a fight against a different tribe. They're fighting
Yeah.
against, different groups of Africans. Like even in the jail in the movie, they are, beefing with each other and stuff like
Hmm.
that. So
Hmm. Yeah.
there are different struggles that they go through and stuff like that. I wanted to say shout out to everybody who's coming in. Matt Villainy joined for the first time, so shout out to him for joining too. He's welcome to speak. We're talking about Amistad, and yeah, anybody can join in the conversation. But I think after Sinke describes the horrors that are on the boat of like pregnant women like getting pushed into the sea with rocks and like people getting whipped to death and stuff like that. It was sort of
Yeah.
like stereotypical slave stuff. It was like stereotypical slave movie stuff at that point. I don't know. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I mean, yeah, it is. Those are the things that we hear that happen, or we watched it before. They are still true, so it is still like very heartbreaking to see that happening to people. But yeah. Um,
Let's move on past that part because now that they're able to
mhm.
talk to Sinke, they go back to court and they tell the story of what happened, right? And then the prosecution starts to dig into them, right? The prosecution says, like, in your country, you have slaves, right? And he said, yes. And he said, how does somebody become a slave? Through war, through debt. So then slavery is just sort of natural, right? And the translator starts getting mad because, like, the translator's saying, like, well, in Africa, slavery is different than in the U.S. What you guys are talking about is totally different. But he says that's not a big deal,
Yeah,
right? The
he
point
he
is,
says
yeah,
like one thing he says like in Mende, slave, the word slave is more associated with worker. So
hmm,
there's no direct translation of slave. They have a word that's closer to worker.
yeah, definitely, definitely. I just saw the tweet from Matt Villainy. He said this is the type of movie I avoid watching, and I understand that. And there's a lot of people that don't like covering slave movies, but I feel like in this movie, if you go into it thinking that you're going to see a bunch of Africans who just lay down and get whipped on, I think you're in for a surprise because honestly, there is a lot of resistance and hope in the movie, and actually they get their freedom at the end. So I think it's actually kind of an inspirational story, and it's a
Yeah.
true story about our ancestors. But actually, how do you feel like when sometimes people say, oh, movie about slavery, I think I'll tune out. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, I would understand because there has been a lot of movies made around slavery, and I would guess that sometimes it is very like maybe hard to watch or maybe even annoying to watch because you don't want to like make a Hollywood thing of the tragedy or whatever. So I understand like if that's not your thing, but I do agree with you that this movie is sort of like more about the fight than the pain of
Yeah,
like slavery. It's
yeah.
more about like a lot of court scenes, a lot of like interesting scenes of that vision that when these people came to America, these people were taken to America. They kind of didn't know the world. They couldn't speak the language. So there's like this sort of barrier of language and also like this very, just weird, not knowing the place sort of sensation. And I think this movie does a great job in showing that, which is like an interesting aspect of
Right.
history if you think about that. So, yeah.
Right. But Avery said in the comments he might watch it tonight. I don't know if you should. I don't know, man. It's a 2.5 hour long movie. You got to be in a certain space. Make sure you got some energy.
I know it is a
But
bit long.
yeah. Let's pick up with the story though. So now that the Africans are in court and stuff like that, basically the judge rules in their favor. The judge says these Africans are not from Cuba. They need to be returned to Africa at once, not to Spain. They don't belong in the U.S. And this was the first time I ever heard a white man say go back to Africa, and I was happy. I was
And
like,
okay, so we have to talk about this one scene in the court though.
well, tell me.
So yeah, so they first put Cinque in the spot and they question him and whatnot, and it's kind of the opposition. I don't know what it's called.
Prosecution.
Prosecution is sort of like arguing a good fight. They're giving like all the right things because they also show documents that they were taken from Sierra Leone or somewhere like from Africa, actually in a ship called Tekora, and they're claiming that they bring out like this British person and they're asking him like. Was there a slave, trade port here? Was there a slave port or something like that here? And he says like, yes, there is, but then like the prosecution, fights against all of that and stuff. So it's kind of looking bad for the Africans. But then Cinque gets up. We see like the scene, Cinque looking at all the white people stuff, like, pantyhose with weird shoes and I don't know, just like pocket watches and stuff like that. And he's trying to make sense of it. And then like at the end, he bursts out like, give us free. And he says it like a bunch of times and people are like shocked, like, okay, he doesn't know any English. What is happening? So I think that's when, and then after that, the judge decides that the Africans are going to go to the Supreme Court.
Yeah. No. He decides that they're free. And he makes his decision, but that decision gets reversed by the president. Martin Van Buren says, no. We're going to appeal this decision to the Supreme Court. And that's how it goes. But definitely when Cinque stood up and said, give us free, it was like one of those triumphant but also funny moments because he stands up and says it and then everybody just sort of like looks, and it's like that moment in the cafeteria when somebody says like a funny joke or they think they say something funny but nobody laughs and then they're like, boy, if you don't stop. It was one of those moments right there.
Yeah, and I mean it was also like proof that they were not from Cuba as well. Like, he was like, he can't say set us free or anything like that. He can say like only give us free.
Yeah, definitely. That was it was interesting, and I think that goes to show the intelligence because I think once again the movie doesn't make the Africans, in my opinion, look stupid, weak, or subservient. They make them actually look very wise and smart because they're able to teach themselves the white man's language without anybody talking to them other than just what they hear around them. Nobody's teaching them, but they find out a way to survive and a way to figure out the system around them. And they even start like reading the Bible. Like you said, one of the slaves is in jail and he looks through the Bible and sees the pictures of Jesus and all this stuff, and he's like figuring out, okay, this is their religion, this is their God, and stuff like that. It was very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And like, I guess before this court, they show that scene where they're reading this Bible in jail, and they got the Bible from like weird singers out front of the jail. I don't know, like they're singing. What is that song that they were singing?
They were singing like Christian hymns because they're abolitionists and they like are just trying to send prayers to the slaves to wish them to have freedom and stuff like that.
Yeah, so they take it, and then like this other guy, Djimon's like sort of friend, I guess. He says like, look, these people like have suffered more than us because like he. And I think it's an interesting conversation. And he starts telling Cinque the story of like the Bible, and he gets it right. He's like, look, here he's helping the poor. Here he's like defending da. And then he says like, and here they take him, like they punish him. And Cinque says he must have done something wrong. Like, why would they punish him? And then his friend says like, we didn't do anything wrong, but they're punishing us. So you think like that's not true? And at the same time, we see like the judge praying in the church, like his Catholic ways and stuff like that. So I think there was like a hint to some divine intervention as well, because that judge was put by the Martin Van Buren people.
Right. That part where they were reading the Bible, I loved and hated at the same time, because on one hand, it's like, damn, they're super smart. They're figuring out the world around them just from the tools they're given. But on the other hand, I'm like, oh no, they're going to start worshiping the white man's religion. And, I've spoken out before about how I feel about Christianity and like how it was brought to us in America and stuff like that. It was used to like keep our minds in chains, make us weak, make us subservient, make us think we're slaves and stuff like that. And I just felt like, that's where it was going to go. I felt a little bit like that.
Yeah, definitely. For me too, because I really kind of hate, since I don't believe in any major religion, I don't really like when they try to make it about religion. I mean, this movie wasn't about religion, but I kind of feel like, cringe a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, but also when I was reading the actual like history of Amistad events, I did read like this one part that this particular event also was sort of, this event caused, missionary travelers and stuff like that
to go to Africa. And that's a good and a bad thing, because I spoke about this before and we were watching that documentary, but a lot of these Christian missionaries that go to Africa go out there and abuse kids. They go out there and, do a lot of evil things out there. And it's good and bad. Religion for Black people has been a positive and a negative. And this includes Islam too. And even though I'm a Muslim, I think Islam has caused a lot of problems for Black people, same as Christianity, a lot of it. And
I didn't think they were, adopting Christianity or anything, because I think what they got from the Bible was that his friend says like, look, he died, but after he died, he rose up to the skies. And I guess this is what happens if you die here. So it was like, if you die in Africa, you have like something else happens to you. But if you die here, you go up to the sky. And he said like, I don't think that's a bad thing or something.
Or maybe it's just inspirational, because the story of Jesus in itself is inspirational, whether you're a Christian or not.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe he was saying like, okay, we will find a way out of this, because even though they killed this man, he found a way to, get some freedom. Right.
So, yeah. And it was also like, we know we're innocent. We know we're good people. And in the end, even if we die, we're going to like end up in a good place or something like that.
Yeah. All right.
Definitely. So yeah, after they do the whole court and they win, but then they have to go to the Supreme Court. Baldwin goes to Cinque and says like, look, we won, but we have to do it all over again.
And he is pissed.
Yeah.
Boy, he is pissed. Cinque is mad. Boy, he did mad.
It was kind of funny here because he's with the translator, right? And he's saying like, tell him that we're going to like, he says, okay, Cinque says like, you lied to me. And Baldwin says, I didn't mean it like that. And then the translator says, there's no meaning it.
Yeah,
in
he said,
our
no, there's no
language.
word for should. He
Yeah,
said
you
no.
either do something or you don't.
Yeah, yeah. In Mende, there's no word for the word for should. It's just either you do it or don't. And Baldwin had told him this is what should happen, but he didn't understand this concept, which I think is like a big theme of language misinterpretation, stuff like that
Yeah,
in this
like
movie.
even if they had a translator, like even language wasn't enough to, kind of mend those differences.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a very funny scene because like Digimon Senke gets so mad that he like goes in front of the bonfire while all the Africans are celebrating, and he like takes off all his clothes and starts yelling at Matthew McConaughey. And yeah, Digimon is ripped. Let's keep it real. Digimon is ripped, and actually, it's okay if you want to do a little thirsting over that. I mean,
Yeah,
stop.
that man is beautiful.
No,
That man
he's
is,
kept it together too. Like even now in 2024,
yeah, I saw his picture with his like little gray hairs. He's still hot.
I got to get in the gym. I got to get right. I want to look like Digimon when I'm 50.
Yeah,
But
definitely no. He was very impressive.
anyway, so they're big mad, and Cinque doesn't want to work with Baldwin, but eventually the abolitionists and Baldwin recruit John Quincy Adams, Anthony Hopkins, to represent them on the case at the Supreme Court. Cinque gets involved. Cinque gets involved in the court case and is actually working through the translator to try to give John Quincy Adams like good arguments to fight the Supreme Court case. So he's saying like, oh, we were kidnapped at sea, or we killed the people at sea. There's no law in the sea, right? And he's coming up with different ideas, which I thought was very dope because once again it shows that the Africans were thinking all the time. They weren't just sitting there. They were trying to defend themselves with the words and find the way to use the white man's law against them. I thought that
Yeah.
was cool. What do you think of that?
Yeah, that was super cool. Like, how do they crack the law system? How do they
Mm,
crack the justice system and then come up with ideas and stuff like that? That was pretty cool. And yeah, and also like in that time we see kind of like John Quincy Adams and Cinque developing some type of friendship.
right.
I would say like he's showing him his plants and he has like this African flower and then like Cinque opens from like it's in a jar or something like that and he opens it up and smells it and stuff. So Cinque like is really like down with John Quincy Adams.
Right. He views him as like a chief because like the way Cinque's mind works, there are chiefs and then there are like the tribe, right? And so when Cinque sits down with John Quincy Adams to like plot how they're going to fight for freedom in this white man's court, he's like, I'm sitting down with another chief, respect, big respect, like, and they're like having that bond right there. And that was very interesting to see, And the way
Yeah.
Cinque frames it, it sort of is like, we think our society, our American society or Western society is like so more advanced than tribal Africa, but it's really not. We have chiefs, we have warlords, we have our, the same things, right? Our president is our big chief and all of our representatives are just his advisors. If we really think about it.
Yeah, if we go to the core of like every system, it's kind of like the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. So I think where were we now in the story?
I mean, yeah, they develop like theories and stuff like that, what they're going to do in the court, and they work towards it, and then they go to court.
Yeah, they go to court. Anthony Hopkins gives like a 5 minute monologue telling the whole reasons why these Africans don't need to be here, that they're free men. They shouldn't worry about civil war because if the country does go into civil war, let it be. These men died fighting for freedom. If they were white, Anthony Hopkins says, the elephant in the room, if these were white guys, we would be singing their praises. But because they're black, we're not going to talk about how they fought for freedom against everything, against all odds. And that speech, makes these judges. By the way, all the judges on the Supreme Court were like 7 slave-owning white guys. They agree. They agree. They say these Africans are free and had every right to fight their kidnappers, which was wild, which was actually a wild thing to say. I did not expect that, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but yeah, like the evidence is so strong that even they can't deny it. And if they
Hmm.
deny it, it would just be like obvious.
Right, right. Were you
And
surprised by the result?
I mean, yeah, a little bit because, when you see those stories, and especially like during that time period, it's like everything is against Black people. There are still slaves. There are still like, all of that, people in plantations. So yeah, I was surprised.
Yeah, I was definitely surprised too.
And there's also like
Yeah,
political conflict at that time. There's, it can be civil war. So it is it's an interesting decision to, rule, to
yeah.
set them free.
Right, right. So the Africans are ordered to be sent back home to Africa. They all get on a big slave boat, not a slave boat, a free boat. They all get on a free boat. I would have been scared to go back
I
because, like,
know, right? I said when we were watching it, I said like, um, yeah, maybe he's gonna decide to stay in America
yeah,
because that's kind of like a phobia
yeah, yeah.
now.
Definitely. Because imagine like you just got off of a boat with a bunch of white people who took you somewhere, and then they say, okay, trust us this time. Get on the boat. We're going to take you back home. That's crazy. That's like, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I'd be like, I'll stay my ass here. I'll wait till y'all invent planes. I'll take a plane back to Africa.
Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, anyway, the Africans get put back on a boat with the British. It looks like the beginning of like a Fire Beyonce video because like they're all wearing like white togas and they all look royal and pristine and clean. They pull up on the shores of Africa. The British are like blowing up the slave castle that is illegally transporting Africans
yeah.
because
With the sassiest like general,
yeah,
he's like blow it up, fire.
fire, more, and then he sachets away. And
Yeah,
yeah, the movie ends with the information that I think about 40 Africans from the Amistad survived out of like 100 or something. Sinke went back to Africa, but his family was sold into slavery, including his wife and his kids. So Sinke actually returns to Africa with nothing, which
yeah.
is which is good and bad at the same time. It's so bittersweet. I wanted it to have that good ass ending, but it didn't.
I know it was
Mm.
so it's so sad. Like he has to like go back a third time. Like he has to do the journey the third time to find her wife.
Yeah, that's
But
why it
it's
should be
like
like Amistad 2, Sinke's Revenge.
I know,
Like he pulls up in America looking for his wife, like Django.
I know that would be. We need that. We need that.
All right, but yeah, that's the movie. And once again, it's a bittersweet feeling. The thing that I don't like about this movie is that I feel like with the ending, how it shows the white folks like fighting slavery, freeing the slaves and stuff like that, it makes you feel like if you're sitting in the theater, it makes the white people feel like very comfortable. You know, like they're looking at the screen and they're saying, "Oh yeah, I definitely would have blew up the slave castle. I would have freed the slaves. I would have fought for Cinque and his friends." But
Hmm.
you know, most likely they wouldn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you're watching this movie and you feel like, oh, it's. I wish there was just a bit more indictment on the people who are causing these problems. You know what I mean? Not in like a hateful way, but not giving the movie space for people to feel like, okay, we can solve racism in 2.5 hours. That's what it felt a little bit like. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
yeah, yeah. Definitely, there's that like sort of white saviors type of feeling to the movie. I think they could have done a better job. Maybe like I don't know, showing inner dialogues of some characters and why they're doing it, or maybe even like inner dialogues of some governments that why like slavery was banned, why they wanted to get them back and stuff like that. Because obviously, not all of the intentions were from the good of their heart.
Mm.
So yeah, there's that feeling. I do agree. I do agree.
Yeah, but overall, I feel like once again, though, Morgan Freeman's character was a bit useless because even though I read more into that dialogue that was not there between him and Cinque, sort of like their interactions,
Hmm.
overall, he didn't really need to be there, and there wasn't much to be done there. Even though he's such a great actor, Morgan Freeman is one of our greatest actors, but he only
Yeah.
had like really a few lines, really a few scenes, and he wasn't utilized. Like this movie is actually really dominated by Matthew McConaughey and Anthony Hopkins,
Yeah,
and
I mean, honestly, I felt like, when we were watching it, I was like, why aren't they using Morgan Freeman to speak with the Africans since they have something in common, even
mhm,
though they might not speak the same language? Obviously, you can think like they're more willing to trust an African American man than a white man.
mhm.
So I'm like, why don't they make him talk to the Africans so that, because there's something in common?
Right. You mean like as in he be the translator? Like Morgan Freeman plays the translator?
No, like, let's say he could have gone there with the translator. So like two, Black Americans, I guess, speaking
Mhm.
with the Africans with the translator would have been a more comfortable environment for them to share their story
Right, right,
rather than, having the white lawyer. And then he could have told the white lawyer and then he could have still
right,
fought for them.
right.
I don't know.
Possibly, but we have to remember, like at that time, like black people couldn't just walk around freely. Like even in a free
Exactly.
state like Massachusetts, I doubt it was just so easy. Hey, I want to go to the jail to visit my niggas. Like you can't do that. It
Yeah,
wasn't like that
probably.
back in the day.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. Overall, though, I'm gonna give this movie a solid. I want to give it like maybe a 7. I want to give it a 7. I wouldn't say I would want to watch it again. I
Hmm.
feel like a movie that's really great that like gets an 8 or above is something I would watch again. But this is something that I'm glad I did watch it because it's been on my list forever, and it was an enjoyable watch. But it's missing a few things. It doesn't have any bigger themes to really talk about because it's telling a true story,
Hmm.
and there's some underutilized actors who are here.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would definitely want to see more from Morgan Freeman. I would also wanted to see like more from like, just like those tribe dynamics and what the Africans were going through. A little bit more of that, I
Yeah.
guess, like maybe their inner talks and stuff,
Hmm.
because there was a lot of like court scenes and talks between like lawyers and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I would want a more exploration of like the psyche of, the prisoners.
Hmm.
And overall, like, yeah, I mean, it's a good movie. It tells a true story. It's a piece from the history. So it is like I would say like if you're interested in historical dramas and stuff, go watch it. It's enjoyable. I would probably give it like a 7.5.
Hmm.
And if you're a white person who's gonna watch this, watch it, but also like keep some things in the back of your head
Yeah.
and don't be like we helped you or all that stuff. So yeah, yeah, keep your ego in check.
Keep your ego in check. Keep your ego
Yeah.
in check. But all right, well, I think we'll wrap up Amistad. This was finally done. That's been on my checklist for a while. Thank you for doing it with me, Acting. Thank you for Avery Adams for coming through. Thank you for Matt Villainy coming through. I appreciate all of y'all. And yeah, gonna be more movies coming soon. Send any recommendations, anything you want us to check out in the comments, in the tweet to me, tweet to Acty, send it through, and we will check it out if it looks dope. So thanks for watching and peace.